I never imagined a simple text could make my hands shake so uncontrollably. The message glowed on my phone screen, searing itself into my memory. You will not be joining us on the family cruise. My wife prefers to keep it just family. These words came from my son, my only child, the very son to whom I had given a fully paid house only months before. A home I had worked tirelessly to secure, sacrificing sleep and pouring all my savings into. I told myself it was an act of love, a foundation for his growing family. Now, it seemed I was no longer considered family enough for their vacation. I stared at the cold message, feeling my chest tighten and blood pounding in my ears. My hands froze, icy and stiff, as I slowly typed back one word. Okay. That single word carried the weight of all my pain, betrayal, and devastating realization. Yet, even as I hit send, my mind screamed, I am good enough to buy your house, but not good enough to share your dinner table, not good enough to sail on your cruise. My heart thundered like war drums. My breath became shallow, but my face remained calm, almost detached. That part of me, the part that had always swallowed pride and excused small acts of cruelty, died in that instant. Then my phone buzzed again. A follow-up text from Emma, my daughter-in-law, polite but icy. I hope you understand it is just simpler this way. Simpler for everyone. Of course, Emma, it is simpler now that you own the house. Simpler now that you have drawn boundaries so clearly between us. I believed I had secured my future. I set the phone down, my hands shaking just a little bit. I was not crying anymore, because at that exact moment, a new side of me awakened. The side that had been too gentle for far too long, the side that would no longer tolerate humiliation. They assumed I would accept this situation, but they were mistaken. The silence in my home grew heavier after that message. I sat in the very same kitchen, but it no longer felt like mine. The morning sunlight slowly spread across the tiled floor, touching the worn wooden chairs and the polished countertops I had carefully selected, as well as the curtains I had sewn with my own hands, all of which I did for them, for Michael and Emma, for the family I thought I was creating. Now that house felt more like a gallery of poor decisions. On the walls hung smiling photos from trips I had paid for. A trip to Disney when Michael was a child, a vacation in Cancun when Emma first became part of the family, and the Christmas cabin getaway I covered completely, telling myself it was my present to them. I kept giving and making excuses for their silence. I reflected on the housewarming last spring, the house I purchased for them, completely paid for with no mortgage or debts, a brand new beginning for their marriage, the most significant gift I had ever given anyone. Emma had held my hands back then, tears sparkling in her eyes, saying, "Oh, Olivia, you did not have to do this. We are so thankful. You will always have a room here, you know that." And I trusted her, naturally, because mothers tend to believe. I remembered the nights spent repainting their master bedroom by myself when we were occupied with work, choosing gentle lavender walls, because Emma said they were calming. I bought the furniture online and put it together by myself in my garage. Every curtain rod, each floor lamp, and every soft throw blanket were carefully selected with love. Staying busy was simpler at that time. It helped me pretend their growing distance was merely stress, just work, just young people trying to figure things out. However, that was not the reality, and it pressed heavily on my chest. I had become so useful to them as the fixer, the provider, the silent supporter, that they stopped recognizing me as a person. I turned into a resource, a wallet, and when the wallet ran dry, they no longer needed the woman behind it. The next morning, The silence became unbearable. I called Martha, who showed up within an hour, just like always, without questions or hesitation. This is what old friends do. They understand when words are not necessary right away. She stepped in, and her eyes immediately searched my face, noticing the pain before I spoke a word. "Tell me," she said softly while setting her bag on the kitchen table. I slid my phone toward her so she could read the message herself. Her jaw tightened as she read it, yet she stayed silent at first, just shaking her head slowly, as if she had been expecting something like this. Finally she spoke. "They have been plotting this, Liv." Her words hit me like a stone in the stomach. My voice was softer than I wanted it to be. I thought perhaps it was only Emma who... It got stuck in his mind, but Michael, he is not like that. Martha's lips pressed tightly together in a thin line. She reached across the table and placed her hand firmly over mine, steady and sure. "Liv, you raised a good boy, but you also raised someone who never had to face hardship, who always had you fixing the mess. And Emma, she noticed that too. She saw what she could shape him into. You made yourself small for them, and now they behave as though that is exactly where you belong." Her words hurt because they were true. I had spent years smoothing out every difficulty for Michael, canceling my own trips to babysit their dog, draining my savings to cover the last of their student loans, showing up at their house whenever Emma said she needed help with organizing, always making myself useful, always available. "You need to shield yourself now," Martha said quietly. "Seriously, before they try to take even more." I looked at her, confused. Take more? They already have everything. Martha's eyes sharpened. "Have you checked your accounts lately? Do you know if your name is still on the house deed or the investments? Olivia, you are still trusting them." A tight knot began forming in my stomach, my heart pounding. I hadn't thought to check any of it. Why would I? They were my family. I confessed in a barely audible voice that I let Emma handle most of the online payments because she said it made taxes easier. Martha exhaled deeply and leaned back in her chair, her brow creased. "Liv, Today, I had to log into everything, and if anything seemed wrong, we would go directly to a lawyer." I swallowed the lump in my throat. My hands began to tremble, but not out of fear this time. It was from the harsh realization that my trust had been turned against me. I was not some innocent, vulnerable elder. I had simply been too trusting. They were relying on that trust to silence me, to keep me obedient, to make me invisible. Yet, as Martha looked at me, waiting for my response, something inside me grew stronger. A small spark that had been buried too long beneath their shadows. I straightened my posture, my voice steady for the first time in many days. "All right, we start today." Martha nodded. "Good, because you are not finished yet, and they are not prepared for what is about to happen." That night, sleep was elusive. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw that cruel message, that cold, heartless text. I pictured Emma's practiced smile, Michael's silent nods, and I heard Martha's voice growing louder than the silence around me. "You need to protect yourself now." At 2:17 in the morning, I stopped trying to sleep. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I reached for my laptop. For years, I had allowed Emma to handle most of the online accounts. "It's just easier, Olivia. You shouldn't have to deal with all these complicated things in your retirement," she would say in that soft, sugary tone. I wanted to believe she was trying to help. I wanted to believe she cared. But now my fingers... I hovered over the login page with a heightened sense of awareness, entering my credentials with fingers trembling from anxiety. The familiar dashboard appeared, Everything seemed ordinary at first glance, but therein lay the risk. It appeared normal because I had never realized otherwise. Slowly and deliberately, I examined the account histories, my checking, savings, and retirement funds. Most transactions were recognizable: utilities, groceries, donations, everyday expenses. Yet the deeper I delved into the past, the more unsettled I felt. Numerous transfers were small enough to escape notice, each categorized as home expenses, property upkeep, or emergency repairs I had never authorized. The cards linked to these transfers were under a secondary user profile, not my own. As I clicked further, Michael's name came up, and my heart sank. I stared at the screen, stunned. She had been quietly attaching her card to my accounts, smoothly siphoning off money for months, maybe more, draining my funds bit by bit. This was not just about being left out of the cruise or some trivial family squabble. This was outright theft. Was Michael too blind to recognize it, or did he know and simply choose to ignore as long as the cash kept coming? A chill rather than fury coursed through me. Not rage, at least not yet, but something colder, sharper. I closed the laptop carefully and leaned back, trying to steady myself. The faint glow in my kitchen caught the edges of the family pictures still hanging on the walls. Images that now resembled proof of some intricate deception I had willingly fallen for. They never cared for me. They only valued what I could offer. My throat stung, but no tears appeared. Instead, I quietly murmured into the still room, "You risked everything on my generosity, Emma. You risked my trust." I had always convinced myself that staying silent did not make me weak, but tonight I finally realized that silence could be just as cutting. They had misjudged me. I would never be that naive again. By dawn, my uncertainty had vanished. I was no longer afraid. The haze had lifted, leaving only a sharp determination. I reached out to my financial advisor, using the polite pretense of a routine inquiry. I didn't want to alert anyone yet, not until I understood the full extent of the situation. Naturally, Mrs. Gardner, Mr. Whitaker answered warmly. He had managed my investments for several years. "How can I help you today?" he asked. I explained calmly. "My son and daughter-in-law have been assisting with some bills, but I want to ensure everything is still in line with our original plan." He reviewed the records while I controlled my breathing, even though my hands shook beneath the desk. "Well, generally, things look steady, but I do notice some recent changes." His tone shifted slightly. "It appears that several fund transfers were scheduled, mostly directed to... During the ongoing home renovations, I found myself swallowing hard. Yes, these were not minor changes, but quite substantial ones. Several large sums were allocated for what they called design enhancements and initial payments to contractors." I gripped the phone even tighter when I asked who had authorized these transfers. There was a brief silence before the response came. Mrs. Gardner technically gave the approval. My stomach churned at the word representative. Who exactly was this representative? He hesitated before revealing that my secondary authorized user, Mrs. Emma Gardner, had processed these transactions. She had full control through the durable power of attorney I had signed the previous spring. I closed my eyes for a moment, recalling that meeting where Emma had insisted I update the paperwork to simplify matters in case of an emergency. She had even brought the notary herself, smiling the entire time. Naturally, of course, she had. I calmly said, "Thank you, Mr. Whitaker. Could you please flag any future transactions for my personal review before carrying them out? I have decided to take a more active role moving forward." Without delay, he agreed. After hanging up, I sat in silence again. Any doubt was gone. Emma was not assisting me. She was laying the groundwork for when she and Michael could quietly divert everything, using the house as their prize. My retirement was not theirs to inherit, not yet, but they were already living as if it were. I glanced at my late husband's locket resting on the windowsill, the one he had given me. He told me after we celebrated our 30th anniversary that he would have noticed this earlier. He had always cautioned me to stay vigilant, but I desperately wanted to trust in family. For many years, I had diminished myself to avoid any disagreements, but love without respect is like a cage, and I had just discovered the way out. I shifted my eyes to the empty shelf across the living room where I once proudly showcased a framed photo from Michael and Emma's housewarming. I took it down 2 nights ago. The shelf looked better empty, lighter, and for the first time, so did I. They had bet on my silence, and they would pay for that mistake. Later that day, I walked to the park. I needed fresh air and a place free from the reminders of my sacrifices, the furniture I had purchased for them, or the photographs of people who only saw me as useful. The old oak tree still stood where my husband used to sit every Sunday afternoon, reading the newspaper while I fed the ducks. It was his favorite spot. He called it our little peaceful refuge. I sat on the bench under its broad branches, the warm breeze easing some of the pressure that had weighed on my chest for so long. I said nothing, just breathed and listened. Then, in a whisper as if he were still there beside me, I said, "You would have seen it, Richard. You would have warned me." My fingers traced the worn edges of the locket I still wore, my thumb gently rubbing the tiny engraved date. The day we finished paying off our first home, the day we believed we were shaping a future for our family, back when Michael was still our bright-eyed boy, excited to build tree houses rather than schemes. I bit my lip tightly to stop from trembling. I did not want to cry any more. The tears had been used up long ago. The following morning, I found myself waiting at my attorney's office. Before they even opened the door, Mr. Dalton, who had managed my affairs for many years, estate planning, the first home purchase for Michael and Emma, even the original documents Emma insisted I sign to have more control over our household budget, was already there. Back then, I trusted him, trusted all of them. Never again. He welcomed me with a warm smile, but the worry in his eyes betrayed him. "Olivia, I did not expect you so early. Is everything all right?" I sat opposite him, folding my hands carefully in my lap. My voice was steady but lacked any gentleness. I said, "I need to reverse the gift of the house." He blinked, slightly startled. "You mean the property you transferred to Michael and Emma's names?" I nodded firmly. "Exactly. I want it undone. I want my assets secured, all financial powers revoked, and every paper trail recorded." For a brief moment, he hesitated. Not because he opposed, but because he understood the consequences. "Olivia, this could cause conflict." "They have already caused conflict," I replied. "I have just been too blind to recognize it." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Very well, we will proceed. And one more thing," I added. The voice grew even softer as I demanded a complete record of every financial action. All activity linked to my accounts needed to be documented. Each withdrawal, every transaction, and every authorization Emma had processed. A flicker of concern appeared on his face. "We will require proof if this situation escalates." "It definitely will," I replied with calm certainty. "Let us not deceive ourselves," he noted, while jotting down a few notes before looking up. "You might want to think about hiring a private investigator." Raising an eyebrow, I asked, "Do you believe it is that serious?" Dalton's tone softened but remained resolute. "Emma is not merely attempting manipulation. She is setting herself up for long-term control. Olivia, you have substantial assets, and if she is already meddling with your accounts, she is probably creating a paper trail to support future claims. We must establish a counter-record, something irrefutable." The thought churned uneasily in my gut, not from fear, but from determination and clarity. "Do it," I said. "Engage whoever you trust." He nodded. "We will manage the legal aspects while the investigator handles everything else." Just like that, the process was set into motion. Leaving his office, I felt a newfound lightness. Not because the crisis was over, but because, for the very first time, I was no longer on the defensive. I was no longer bracing for the next betrayal. I was taking control and moving forward. As I settled into my car, a faint, bitter smile crossed my lips. They wanted silence, and they would have it, but it would be my version of silence, my kind of quiet. Silent in its approach and striking with exactness the following morning, something slid quietly beneath my door and caught my eye as I entered the kitchen. It was a simple white envelope, the same type Emma always used for important papers she prepared to assist me. Resting atop it was a sticky note penned in her unmistakably familiar handwriting saying, "Just sign when you're ready, Mom. It will simplify everything while we are away." I froze, realizing they were already gone, off on their cruise, drifting across sapphire seas, enjoying cocktails and laughing, while here at home their scheme kept unfolding. With cautious hands, I opened the envelope and carefully unfolded the neat stack of documents inside, all professionally typed and flawlessly prepared. At first glance, these appeared to be harmless updated forms, routine changes. Emma had mastered the art of disguising control as convenience, but the deeper I read, the heavier the knot tightened in my stomach. Hidden under vague language about estate optimization and streamlining authority was a full power of attorney. Permanent and irrevocable, it granted Emma total legal authority over my finances, property, healthcare decisions, my entire existence. My breath caught as the crushing reality sank deep into my chest. They had not merely been planning. They were poised to seize everything immediately, not someday in the future. I stood there clutching the papers, my hands trembling not with fear, but with the harsh awareness of how far they had gone. They were ready to proceed, but Emma did not want to wait for my natural end. She desired control while I was still alive. She aimed to remove me with courtesy and legality without needing to get involved herself. Michael, my own son, was he truly oblivious or simply pretending not to notice what she was doing? Either way, the truth was equally heartbreaking. They were no longer family. Instead, they appeared as predators disguised behind familiar faces. I carefully slipped the unsigned papers back into the envelope, closed it, and placed it on the counter as if it meant nothing. Let them assume I had not caught on. Let them believe I was still that innocent woman who trusted blindly, who signed anything presented to her, who smiled and said, "Thank you." But that woman no longer resided here. The private investigator was scheduled to arrive later that day. My lawyer had already begun drafting the documents to freeze every shared authorization, and now, with these papers, I possessed yet another piece of proof, written evidence of their intentions. Sitting at the kitchen table, bathed in sunlight warming my face, they believed the game was still theirs to control. However, they overlooked one thing. Silence does not mean weakness. The moment I placed the unsigned documents back in their envelope, something inside me changed. It was odd how serene I felt. I was no longer shaken, not even angry. Instead, I was focused and incredibly determined. They assumed they could act confidently while away, but they were mistaken. I never imagined I would find myself sitting here feeling helpless and confused, overwhelmed by complicated legal terms that seemed impossible to understand. I thought I would feel proud to be included in my own case, but they completely underestimated me. By midday, I was back in Michael's office. This time, he did not greet me with worry. Instead, he simply gave a nod, already picking up on the urgency written all over my face. They were trying to take advantage of me while I was out of town. I slid the envelope across his desk. He carefully unfolded the documents, his forehead creasing as he read aloud, "They are becoming brazen." At last he said, "This goes beyond unethical behavior. It is downright exploitative." He continued, "If you had signed this, Olivia, they would have had the legal authority to sell your property, empty your bank accounts, or even place you into care homes of their choice." His eyes searched mine, expecting panic. Instead, I looked back calmly and said, "Then we must act faster." He smiled, a faint spark of admiration glistening in his eyes. "We already have most of the paperwork ready. I have begun the process to reverse the house transfer. Account freezes are underway. The private investigator has started combing through the financial records. But after seeing these power of attorney forms," he pointed to the papers, "we will pursue even more forceful actions." I leaned in and declared, "Everything will be locked down. No one has access to my accounts except me. Not a single dollar moves without my approval." He nodded approvingly. "We are also preparing a protective clause for your inheritance. Should they attempt any legal manipulation from now on, we will have a complete timeline ready." To resist their attempts at control, I leaned back, slowing my breath. My hands were motionless, and my shoulders finally relaxed. For the first time in months, or perhaps years, I ceased reacting. Instead, I was constructing a barrier they would remain unaware of until they collided with it. When I came back home that afternoon, the house seemed altered, not because it had changed, but because I had. I navigated the rooms with fresh perspective. The walls no longer symbolized comfort or shared moments. They stood as reminders of my kindness and their sense of entitlement. I stopped by the empty shelf once again where the housewarming picture had been, that joyful yet deceitful photograph. I reached into the drawer and pulled it out one more time, gazing at their cheerful faces. I murmured quietly to the frame, "You believed I was here to obey you?" My thumb lingered over Michael's face. "You thought I would never refuse?" Then I flipped the picture face down and slid it deeper into the drawer, leaving it in darkness. 2 days later, my phone rang. I immediately recognized the number. My private investigator. I answered on the first ring. "Mrs. Gardner." His voice was calm, but carried an undercurrent of urgency. "You need to see what I uncovered." I closed the curtains before responding, driven by instinct. "Tell me." He was quick to continue. "Your daughter-in-law has recently put up the property as security for a second mortgage. She has already initiated the pre-approval with a private lender, and the paperwork was submitted last week. I remained completely still while they were already taking out loans against the house I had given them entirely as a gift, as if it belonged to them without any restrictions to use as they wished. I inquired whether they had disclosed how they came to own it, and they described it as a straightforward family handover. He responded plainly with no reference to any power of attorney abuse, manipulation, or unauthorized financial dealings connected to my accounts. In fact, the lender seemed impressed by what they called generous family backing. I bit the inside of my cheek hard to hold back a tremble. They were no longer just spending my money. They were risking it. They were creating debt on top of my goodwill, debts I had never authorized, and dangers I had never consented to bear. Had I not initiated this process when I did, I could have returned home one day to discover the house sold, my savings wiped out, my accounts emptied, while legally they would have emerged unscathed. I asked if they suspected I knew anything about this. They said no, ma'am. As far as they were aware, I was still quietly at home. I exhaled slowly and said, "Good. Let's keep it that way." After we hung up, I sat in the faint glow of my living room with only the soft hum of the refrigerator breaking the silence. This was no longer just betrayal, it was an active theft. Yet strangely, I felt neither fear nor anger, only a cold, sharp resolve. They had been careless because they assumed I would never question them, that I was still the mother who would simply accept it. They were willing to do anything to preserve peace, but they had not realized something very simple until a woman like me finally says, "No, it is already too late for the other side." I smoothed the front of my blouse and gazed out the window at the house I had purchased for them, and in that silent moment I smiled. "You gambled with my gift, Michael. Now I will gamble with your future." That night, I did not switch on the lights. I sat quietly by the window, watching the street lamps cast long shadows over the deserted sidewalk. The world outside moved softly, unaware of the turmoil silently unfolding inside these walls. For the first time in a long while, I was not afraid or confused. I was plotting. They believed I would collapse under the burden of their betrayal. They thought their careful smiles, their routine of "just helping you, Mom," had left me powerless. But the reality was simple. They had constructed their fragile structure on my trust, and now I had stopped holding my breath. I observed as a neighbor pulled into their driveway, their headlights briefly lighting up my living room. The light flickered across the empty space on the mantel where the family photo had once rested. The vacant shelf seemed cleaner now, honest, I murmured quietly, to the still air, more to myself than anyone else. They gambled with my gift, now I am gambling with their future. Saying it aloud felt empowering. I had spent years swallowing unease, convincing myself that love meant tolerance, that being needed was equal to being cherished. But being needed is different from being truly loved. They cared about my money, my usefulness, and my readiness to surrender everything without questions. Yet once they no longer required me personally, the mother, the woman. They discarded me without regret, smiling as they did. They had already ventured so far that I did not have to force the issue. I only needed to stop supporting their fragile hold. I closed my eyes and imagined Emma's face, the courteous but practiced concern, her rehearsed gentle voice whenever she desired something. "You are like a second mother to me, Olivia." Lies. No one tries to erase their own mother. No one carefully hides power of attorney documents beneath trivial papers unless they have been plotting it for a long time. I opened my eyes and leaned back, feeling my posture straighten. They expected me to stay silent, but my silence turned into a weapon. I looked out the window longer, the cool night air against the glass refreshing. After all they had done, I did not feel shattered. Instead, I felt strong. The following days unfolded precisely, without emotion or hesitation, each action deliberate and purposeful. Every morning, I sat in Dalton's office, with him on one side and the private investigator on the other. We worked quietly, efficiently, almost with clinical detachment. Every transaction was examined, every withdrawal followed, and every account Emma had accessed was cataloged with great care. As the files accumulated, my stomach should have twisted with anxiety, but it did not. The more we uncovered, the clearer everything became. Emma had not only connected her personal card to my accounts, but also used my retirement savings to settle her personal credit card bills. She had funneled funds into private investment accounts under her maiden name and even used my identity to obtain pre-approval for the second mortgage they planned to take out on the house I had gifted them. All this happened while she smiled at me across the dinner table, constantly calling me Mom. Dalton pushed another printed statement across the table. The private investigator added that this pattern of deceit would be damning in court if necessary. The timing was too perfect, too. The cruise served as a flawless distraction while these final documents were slipped under your door. She wanted you out of power before you even realized what they planned to do. I nodded, letting the fact settle on me like a weight finally lifted from my shoulders. It was greed disguised as care, I said softly. They did not want me gone. They just craved control. Dalton met my gaze and said they would have had it, Olivia completely. Most people sign these papers without ever looking at the fine print, but I did not sign. My voice was steady and firm. Dalton agreed no, you did not. Now they had left a trail long enough to convict themselves. We worked late into the night. By the time I left, the sky had darkened again, but I felt no exhaustion or fear. Instead, I felt something stronger, momentum. When I arrived home, I moved through the house with a different kind of look filled the room. Now, the curtains Michael had selected, the costly light fixtures I paid for the marble countertops she insisted on upgrading last year. The soft close cabinets she demanded because she believed they made the house appear more refined. It all belonged to me once again, every item they had risked. Everything, assuming I would remain silent, that I would be too old, too submissive, too desperate to cling to any fragments of affection they granted. They forgot who built this house. I ran my finger softly along the kitchen counter and whispered, "You tried to erase me while I was still alive now. I am erasing you while you are still pretending to smile." Tomorrow was the day the paperwork would be completed. The house, transfer, finalize the asset, freezes, activated, and by the time their cruise ship returned to port, the world they imagined was theirs would already have vanished, and they would not even realize it until they attempted to re-enter it. The documents lay before me waiting. Everything was ready. The house transfer, the asset protections, the full cancellation of Emma's financial access. Every escape route they had constructed for themselves had been sealed. Every piece of land they believed they possessed had been taken away. Beneath their feet, all without a single confrontation. Dalton stood silently at the far end of the conference table. The notary adjusted her pen, waiting. The only thing remaining was my signature for a moment. My hand hovered over the page, not out of hesitation that was. Long gone, but weighed down by the immense significance of this moment, it was not merely legal documents. It represented countless years of sacrifice, dedication, blind affection, and silent endurance, all being rewritten in dense black ink. The notary looked up, politely silent, yet expectant. My hand remained steady as I finally placed the pen to the paper, signing my name once, then again, and yet again. With every signature, a sense of relief washed over me. When the final document was signed, Dalton carefully collected the pages, his expression composed, yet his voice held quiet pride. "It is finished. Olivia, the complete reversal is now official. The house belongs to you again legally. Every financial authorization previously held against you has been nullified. They no longer have access to your accounts, your property, not even your utilities. I gave a single nod, my tone steady and calm. If they attempt to dispute this. Dalton's eyes narrowed. We possess every piece of evidence required. Investigators' full report, the unauthorized transactions, and the coercive power of attorney papers slipped beneath your door while they conveniently were away. If they decide to challenge now, they will only incriminate themselves. I exhaled slowly. The fear vanished. The long wait was finally over. For the first time in what felt like forever, my future belonged completely to me. As I stepped out into the cool evening breeze, I lingered on the courthouse steps. Their cruise ship was due to arrive in 4 days. 4 days before their return. Hoping to reclaim the world they once dominated, they had no clue the locks had been changed. They did not realize the house was no longer theirs. Their eagerness to leverage the debt had already sealed the fate quietly, legally, and without possibility of reversal. While they floated on their ship, convinced they had won, the sale had been completed just hours earlier. I signed the reversal with a clean buyer offering full cash and an accelerated closing. The money was already secured in a new account, one they could not access and did not even know existed. A smile spread across my face as the breeze grew cooler against my skin. They believed I was powerless and that my silence meant defeat, but silence can hold great strength. When they returned in the morning, I was already there, parked a block away, standing calmly on the opposite side of the street. Their car rolled up, carrying them home from their glamorous cruise, sun-kissed, calm, and utterly unaware. Emma stepped out first, sunglasses resting high on her head, issuing orders to Michael as he unloaded their bags. She was chatting about setting up an appointment to finalize the second mortgage. Michael barely answered, scrolling through his phone in his usual detached yet compliant manner. Suddenly, they both stopped moving. 2 unfamiliar vehicles were parked in the driveway alongside moving trucks. A young couple stood at the front door, happily talking with the realtor. I crossed the street slowly, every step deliberate and calm. Michael noticed me first. "Mom." His voice trembled with confusion and something deeper, something unspoken. A sudden wave of fear crept into his eyes. Emma's gaze sharpened in suspicion as she asked, "What is happening? Who are these people?" The young couple offered polite smiles before following the real estate agent inside. The sound of the front door closing behind them sealed their fate. Now, I finally spoke up. "You no longer have to worry about handling anything on my behalf." Emma's face flushed immediately. "What on earth does that mean?" Michael's voice rose with confusion. "Mom, what is going on? Why are there strangers in our home?" I let the silence settle, watching their panic grow like a storm. "This is not your house," I said calmly. "No longer yours." Emma sprang forward, her voice rising in that sharp tone she always used when things did not go as planned. "You cannot do this. We are in the middle of refinancing. We have binding agreements," I interrupted, pulling a thick folder from my bag. "These are the only documents that count." I handed it to Michael. His hands trembled while flipping through the pages. His face turned pale with every paper he read. Reversals, sale papers, the investigators' reports, records of Emma's unauthorized transactions, proof of everything. Emma snatched the folder away, skimming through the documents frantically. Her breath quickened as she calculated and searched for loopholes, anything to manipulate. "None of this will stand," she snapped. "We only manage things for your benefit. You will regret this when you calm down." "We were just trying to assist." My voice remained calm. "Assist you?" It meant emptying my account secretly, gambling away money secured by a house you no longer owned, and forging power of attorney papers, hoping I would sign them without protest while you were halfway across the ocean. Emma's jaw tightened. Michael finally spoke, his voice breaking. "Mom, we didn't mean to." I raised my hand sharply. "Stop." The word was quiet but firm, leaving no room for argument. They said nothing more. For the first time, I saw it clearly in their eyes. Not love, not regret, but pure fear. The kind of fear people have when they realize the one they underestimated has been silently observing, waiting for the right moment. I let the silence hang heavy between us. Then, for the first time in months, I smiled. A genuine smile. "You gambled with my trust," I said, "and you lost." Emma's face twisted into something harsh for a fleeting moment. She looked like a trapped animal ready to strike, but realizing the trap was already closed, she shouted, "You cannot just take everything from us. We built this life, and you do not have the right to ruin it because of a few misunderstandings." Michael's breath grew shallow, his hands gripping a folder as if it might disappear if he loosened his hold. I remained calm and measured. "You did not build this life," I said softly. "You took it apart, piece by piece, smile by smile. And you thought I would just let you." Emma's voice cracked, filled with desperation. "Now we have rights. We are family. You cannot just cut us off like this." I could feel the tension in the air. The burden of years pressing down on me, the numerous occasions I remained silent just to preserve harmony, the humiliations I endured to be the devoted mother, the guilt, the giving, the believing, yet not today. I reached into my bag and drew out the second folder, slimmer than the first, but somehow more substantial. I held it between us and said calmly, "If you want to pursue legal measures, this is what you will confront." I handed it to her. She grabbed it fiercely like a wild animal seizing its prey. Inside was the complete evidence file assembled by the investigator and Dalton, containing copies of every unauthorized withdrawal, every transfer, every fraudulent document Emma had made using my name, every paper she slipped under my door while smiling to my face. Fraud, elder financial abuse, coercion, forgery. Emma flipped through the pages more rapidly now, her breath growing shallow and her complexion fading as the truth began to engulf her. My tone softened, but my words carried even greater weight. "If you attempt to take me to court, Emma, this file will become part of the public record. Each transaction, every forged document, every effort to steal from your own mother-in-law." I let my words settle like a heavy weight. Michael murmured almost inaudibly, "Emma, what have you done?" She turned sharply to him, her voice cracking. "Don't dare blame me, Michael. You were fine with it when the money was coming in." But Michael simply... He stood there with eyes wide and shoulders sagging beneath the burden of everything falling apart before him. I observed them both intently, witnessing the marriage that had once appeared so steadfast in its silent cruelty begin to fracture rapidly. Drawing in a deep breath, I spoke my final words. "I was your mother, Michael. You made me your target." His lip trembled, his head bowed down. For a fleeting moment, I glimpsed the boy he once was, the boy who asked me to fix his toy truck, who ran to me with scraped knees. But that boy was long gone, and I had finished grieving him. "This is not vengeance," I continued, my voice gentler now. "It is self-protection. For the first time in many years, I am truly defending myself." Emma hurled the folder onto the pavement, staring daggers at me. You believe you have won, but you will end up alone. I smiled once more, calm and composed. Alone, I whispered softly, is far better than being exploited. Then I turned away and walked off without once glancing back. I drove home slowly, the engine's hum soothing beneath me as I meandered through silent streets, feeling each breath calm itself. The sun had already sunk low by the moment I arrived at my modest apartment building. It was neither grand nor ostentatious, but it was mine, completely mine. Once I locked the door behind me, I pictured the scene continuing to play out back at that house. My house no longer, someone else's now. The movers, the new couple happily making themselves at home in the space Michael and Emma had believed was untouchable. And there they were, standing outside on that driveway, encircled by the ruins of their ambitions, their home destroyed. Their deceptions revealed their fantasies broken. The phone vibrated once on the counter. A message appeared. It was from Michael Mom. Please, can we talk? This was not what I wanted. Please. I stared at the words cold and hollow. He had not addressed me as Mom in person for months. Yet, now deprived of everything, he suddenly recalled my place in his life. I did not respond. Another message arrived within moments. I am sorry. Emma. She lost control. She pushed me. You know how she is. I never intended to hurt you. I could almost hear his tone in those words, frantic, pleading, trying to rewrite the past now that there was no longer anything to take. My thumb hovered over the screen, but I did not type. Back because I had finally understood. They only miss me when I say no. I set the phone down, face first, on the table, and moved toward the window. The evening breeze brought the soft sound of children playing somewhere along the street. Genuine laughter. Behind me, the apartment was serene, secure, empty in the purest sense. No manipulation, no schemes, just calm. They believed I could not survive without them. But in truth, I had been suffocating under their weight for years. Every sacrifice made for Michael, every penny, every moment invested in that house, that marriage, that family, transformed into a weapon, wielded against me. And yet standing here now, devoid of all I once held onto, I had never felt so free. Let them unleash their fury, let them chaos. Reigned, and they could point fingers all they wanted. I had nothing remaining to offer them, and that realization transformed me into the freest woman in existence. I murmured into the vacant space as if sharing a secret prayer intended solely for myself. Silence does not equate to fragility, and at last I truly believed in that truth.